films hit the mainstream pop culture world with a bang in the 80s. Before then, the genre was really more of a special club, which it still is, but in the 80s was when things seemed to explode. We've talked before about how VHS and cable TV helped create the wave of 80s horror, the likes of which had never been seen before. That decade gave us the rise of icons, one of the new pantheon of horror specifically that came out of that decade and rose head and shoulders and glove above the rest. Freddy Krueger became a global phenomenon when he rose out of the world of dreams, or should I say nightmares, when Nightmare on Elm Street hit theaters in 1984, and he would continue to rule the decade, as well as continue to be one of the reigning kings of horror to this day. Freddy would start out as the darkest of the dark when it came to his story and character, but would evolve into a wisecracking villain whose personality was as big a draw as the special effects that were a part of every Nightmare film. And the only way something like that could occur in such an evolutionary way would be the man behind the burns just being that damn charming and likable. How do you make a character like Freddy Krueger become the stuff of plushies and posters, of water squirters and kids' toys, when kids were the very thing he started off slaughtering? How the hell does that even happen? Well, it happens when Robert Englund is the guy in the sweater and fedora, relishing every minute of screen time and one-liner with panache. Robert Englund would go on to become this generation's Vincent Price, the erudite character within the horror genre. Robert Englund would go beyond Freddy Krueger into a realm all his own. He'd create new characters, homage others, and would do so while creating a rabid fan base that's got multiple generations within it. On this episode of What the Fuck Happened to This Horror Star, we're meeting the man of your dreams as we find out what the fuck happened to Robert Englund.
I want to thank you guys for watching Where in the Horror Are They Now? And ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show.
Robert Englund was born in 1947, a native Californian. He grew up loving to surf and would start finding his love of acting early on in life. Eventually, Englund would wind up becoming a seasoned theater actor and would perform Shakespeare on the stage before becoming a working film and TV actor. One of Englund's first horror roles was one of his first film roles, with the part of Buck in Tobe Hooper's Eaten Alive in 1976, the Killer Croc movie where he meets a nasty end. The same year he was eaten by a croc, Englund would get punched in the nose by Chris Christopherson in the remake of A Star is Born. Yes, the movie with Lady Gaga wasn't the first version of this story, far from it. Englund worked steadily through the 70s and 80s, doing both TV and features. At one point, Englund read for the role of Han Solo in a little movie called Star Wars. While he didn't get that part, or the part of Luke Skywalker, he had a buddy named Mark, who he thought would be great as the farm boy from a galaxy far, far away. Englund told Mark Hamill about the auditions, and the rest, as they say, is history. So yes, Star Wars fans, you should thank Robert Englund for your favorite Jedi. In 1981, he journeyed into the horror genre again with Dead and Buried, the creepy town with a dark secret film that was co-written by Alien scribe Dan O'Bannon. He'd also co-star in Galaxy of Terror, the Roger Corman-produced horror and science fiction film that was actually capitalizing on Alien's success. This cult classic would pair him with the late great Sid Haig and feature one of the most infamous worm scenes of all time. While doing various TV shows like Chips, Heart to Heart, and even Charlie's Angels, it would be in 1983 when Englund would hit pay dirt with the small screen as part of the television event V. Kids today won't realize what a moment V was for those of us who didn't have VCRs or bingeable streaming. The miniseries created by Kenneth Johnson was amazing. Fantastic actors and characters, as well as a retelling warning of what happened with the Nazis in World War II. The metaphor was a major and portrayed well aspect of what went down during that time. People who became sympathizers to protect themselves or to benefit from what was happening, freedom fighters, the lie beneath the smile, and the literal devouring of an entire race. But it also showed characters like Englund's sweet and kind Willie, the visitor who was actually sent to the wrong place. Willie was a translator who had been sent to the wrong country, which is why he wasn't the best with English. Willie would wind up falling in love with a human woman named Harmony, and would become one of the first of the aliens to be shown not only as the reptilian race they were, but also becoming one of the first to change sides and fight with the humans against the invasion. Willie would become a fan favorite thanks to Englund's performance and likable portrayal of a soldier who never really wanted to fight and who saw the wrong of what was happening around him. This would be the case of many Germans who defied the Nazis during the war and who would help many escape the atrocities happening around them. Willie would become a hero, and his tragic story with Harmony would be one of the standouts of the V saga. But it would be the following year that the role of a lifetime would come to Robert Englund, and funnily enough, he wasn't the first choice. Wes Craven's creation of Freddy Krueger was originally going to be played by villain extraordinaire David Warner, but Englund would get the part. Nightmare on Elm Street would launch a film series that became one of the greatest in the horror genre and would cement Englund as one of film's greatest villains and monsters. It would be the complete opposite of his role on V, and handily for Englund, the role had him under a lot of prosthetics, which meant he wasn't readily recognizable when walking down the street. It also meant he could get other roles not of the horror baddie variety, which he continued to do on television as well as in film. Englund would become Freddy 4 more times on the big screen in the 80s alone, and would continue working on TV with the regular series of V, the single-season series of Downtown opposite Michael Nouri, and even Knight Rider. But he'd also take Freddy from the big to small screen in the historic move of having Freddy get his own TV series, Freddy's Nightmares, in 1988. No other big screen boogeyman would have that happen until 2 years ago, when Chucky made the leap. Freddy's Nightmares was an anthology series which had Freddy as your host, who would sometimes play a part in the freaky tales being told. The first episode actually focused on Freddy's trial pre-burn and was the story of how he became what he was. As he says at the beginning of this episode, this was his nightmare. During this time, Englund would take a stab at directing with 976 Evil in 1988, the satanic phone line film which stars Evil Ed himself. Stephen Jeffries plays the lonely teenager who gets possessed by the demonic entity that preys on the phone line. In 1989, Englund would go classic with the horror in one of my favorite adaptations of Phantom of the Opera. This version would have the Phantom, named Eric Dessler, make a deal with the devil. This would be the cause of his facial deformity, the price of creating beautiful music that will be the only thing he would ever be loved for. Eric finds an inventive way to fix his face, not with the typical mask, but by using other skin to patch his back together, as well as makeup and wigs. Phantom also had the inventive use of time travel for Christine, played by Jill Sholin, to be brought back to her Phantom. The film would also co-star Bill Nighy and Alex Hydewhite. Phantom of the Opera would really play up the fact that Englund was well known for Freddy Krueger, with the movie poster proclaiming, "Robert Englund was Freddy, now he's the Phantom of the Opera, an all-new nightmare." While this didn't tread into copyright infringement for New Line, it detracted from the fact that Englund was playing a completely different sort of character, albeit still a bloody and murderous one. Phantom gave Englund a chance to play the romantic angle, and he did a fantastic job of it. He was brutal, creepy, seductive, and tragic.
You made it all possible, Christy. Now, it's just a matter of what you choose. Love or music.
At one time, there was a plan to do a sequel where Eric finds himself enamored with a blind singer in present day, as the film does leave it open for one. But sadly, that never came to pass. The 90s continued Freddy's reign at the box office, but before the final nightmare, Englund would star as the leather-clad tough Smiley in the now cult classic, at the time not so much, Andrew Dice Clay vehicle, The Adventures of Ford Fairlane. Final Nightmare would arrive a year later in 91 and would bring Freddy into the realm of 3D and show the killer's violent beginnings, with Alice Cooper starring as Freddy's father. Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare was quite the family affair, as we also meet Freddy's daughter and get to see Englund out of the makeup. In 1992, Wes Craven would join forces with Englund again with the aptly named Nightmare Cafe on NBC. The series had Englund as Blackie, the mysterious and otherworldly proprietor of said cafe. The cafe was sort of a crossroads for lost souls. The show was sort of a Twilight Zone meets X-Files, with Blackie directing Frank and Faye, his two employees, as they helped the patrons of the cafe figure out their troubles as a way of redeeming themselves too. Nightmare Cafe was a fantastic series, but sadly NBC canceled it after only 6 episodes. That same year, Englund would star in a sort of dual role in Danse Macabre, which carried a strong Phantom of the Opera vibe. This story, though, was set within the world of the ballet, with Englund playing Anthony, the dance teacher who becomes obsessed with his student. Meanwhile, murders are happening around the ballet. This similarity to Phantom of the Opera isn't a surprise, as the film was originally supposed to be a sort of sequel to that movie, but that connection was removed. In '93, Englund starred as the Marquis de Sade and his descendant Paul in Tobe Hooper's Night Terrors. The film is a rather strange one, which focuses on a cult that follows the writings of de Sade. In 1994, Englund returned as a new sort of Freddy Krueger with New Nightmare, perhaps one of the most meta horror movies ever made, and what I would consider one of the smartest. Wes Craven managed to bring new life to the nightmare with this entry, which is set in a pseudo-version of reality, with everyone playing versions of themselves and Freddy Krueger being an entity of evil. Englund plays himself and this new Uber Freddy. In 1995, Robert would join forces with Tobe Hooper again with The Mangler, perhaps one of the most bizarre Stephen King adaptations ever made. Englund plays the gross and handicapped owner of said Mangler, a laundry press machine that's possessed with evil and kills people. It's just as weird as that sentence sounds, and Englund delivers the sort of scenery-chewing performance this movie needed, and somehow it got not one but 2 sequels. In 1997, Englund joined some of his fellow horror icons in Wishmaster, which would be produced by Wes Craven. The Killer Genie film is now a modern classic thanks to the creation of the Djinn as a great bad guy and the insane amount of horror legends in one flick. Besides Englund was Kane Hodder, Tony Todd, Reggie Bannister, Joe Pilato, and Angus Scrimm as the narrator. Thanks to the success of Wes Craven's Scream in 1996, slasher films got a new lease on life, or death, I suppose. In 1998, Urban Legend hit screens with Englund playing college professor William Wexler. Urban Legend was a neat mix of the Scream level of smart and savvy horror, but also incorporated the urban legend myths we'd all grown up with. It was also another of those films that brought together icons of horror, with Englund being joined in the film by Brad Dourif and Danielle Harris. That same year, Englund starred in a rather amusing bit of casting in Dee Snider's Strangeland, where he played one of the angry mob against the release of Snyder's terrifying Captain Howdy after being cured of his insanity. This, of course, doesn't last long. It would be in 2001, though, that Englund would don the fedora and sweater one more time for the throwdown horror fans have been waiting for with Freddy vs. Jason. The film was a massive hit and was the culmination of a promised meeting of the monsters. In 2005, Tim Sullivan would cast Englund as Mayor Buckman in the remake of Herschel Gordon Lewis's classic splatterfest 2000 Maniacs, named 2001 Maniacs. The ghost cannibal flick was a skewering of racism and insanity. It would also pair Englund once again with the awesome Lynn Shay. 2006 would see Robert appear, albeit briefly, in the Adam Green masterpiece Hatchet, which would star in a dual role his buddy Kane Hodder. That same year, Robert Englund would switch sides from the slasher to the man trying to stop the killer in the fantastic Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. If you haven't seen Behind the Mask, you've sold yourself very short and need to rectify that immediately. The film is a faux documentary that takes on the tropes of the classic slasher and the mythos that surrounds them as we watch Leslie Vernon, a seemingly sweet and good-natured man who is getting ready for his first night of murdering and slashing. In this universe, it would seem that, at least to Leslie, killers like himself and Freddy and Jason, etc., have a purpose of keeping the balance to things. Leslie is followed around by a documentary crew who eventually realize this is serious, but by then it is too late. Robert plays Doc Halloran, the sort of Sam Loomis / Donald Pleasance of the film to Leslie's Michael Myers.
What's he calling himself now? Leslie Vernon? How perfect.
I honestly can't say enough good about this movie, which also stars the late great Scott Wilson in a fantastic role as a retired serial killer. Englund would appear in a number of horror films in the following years, as well as more television work, including adding his voice to the Batman animated series as the Riddler, as well as Justice League as Felix Faust. On the Marvel side, he'd appear in Spectacular Spider-Man as the Vulture and the Superhero Squad show as Dormammu, just to name a few. FearNet would be the home to Robert Greenhall's web series Fear Clinic in 2009, which would bring Kane Hodder and Englund back together with Danielle Harris and Lisa Wilcox as well. The concept is a neat one, with Englund playing Dr. Andover, a doctor who has lost his license and who's obsessed with curing people of their fears. Hodder plays Vlcek, his very large assistant, who helps him to provide his quote-unquote treatments. Hall would return to the story a few years later with a feature film starring Englund and Fiona Dourif. The land of video games was also no stranger to Englund, who lent not only his voice, but likeness to a number of them. Freddy Krueger would become part of the Mortal Kombat universe in 2011. That same year, Englund would play a version of himself in Call of Duty Black Ops, with perhaps one of the most epic zombie add-ons of all time. Englund was part of a massive celebrity-filled campaign, which co-starred Sarah Michelle Gellar, Danny Trejo, and Michael Rooker, all playing themselves, and Papa George himself, George Romero, also playing himself. In 2017, Englund would add to his DC repertoire with Injustice 2, where he voiced the nightmare-creating Scarecrow. Perfect casting, if you ask me.
We both use fear as a weapon.
Robert Englund embraced the genre that loves him wholeheartedly, continuing to work within it and not limiting himself to just horror either in both film and television. He stepped back into the role of Freddy Krueger once again for the first time since Freddy vs. Jason in the Goldbergs episode Mr. Knifey Hands in 2018. In 2019, Robert Englund joined his Nightmare on Elm Street 2 co-star Mark Patton for Patton's documentary Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, which spoke about Patton's journey as a gay man in Hollywood and how Freddy's Revenge was one of the more gay horror films of the 80s and has since become embraced by the gay community. It's a side of the story you may not have heard, and is a look behind a curtain not normally seen. In 2020, he hosted the docuseries True Terror with Robert Englund for the Travel Channel, a series that looks at horrifying true stories throughout history. That same year, he lent his voice to J.J. Villard's Fairy Tales for Adult Swim, a gross and star-filled retelling of classic fairy tales that had a number of other horror stars on board, including Doug Bradley, John Kasser, Linda Blair, and Cassandra Peterson, just to name a few. 2022 would see Englund bringing full circle his horror fame with his appearance as the tragic Victor Creel in the 4th season of Stranger Things. Without going into spoiler territory for those of you who haven't seen it yet, what the hell is wrong with you? Go watch it! This season is steeped in nods and homages to Nightmare on Elm Street, not the least of which is one of the show's heroines is named Nancy. It's tailor-made for fans of horror, and especially Nightmare on Elm Street, and having Englund play the role he does is absolutely perfect. Robert Englund is a living legend to horror fans and film fans around the world, and he loves the fans right back, appearing at numerous conventions around the globe. He's a fantastic storyteller at the shows and gives a great experience to every fan. He'll talk your ear off, or maybe cut it off, but it's always a great time. One thing he really loves is seeing all of the ink that fans have gotten over the years. Englund's website, robertenglund.com, has an entire gallery dedicated to fan tattoos, as well as convention appearances with fan photos on display. Speaking of conventions, we've got a special treat for you on this episode of What the Fuck Happened to Our Favorite Horror Celebrity. Horror Hound Weekend is a fan event that happens twice a year, or did until COVID happened a couple of years ago. Due to that, Horror Hound Weekend went virtual, and Robert Englund, who was to appear at that show, did an exclusive interview for the virtual con only for ticket holders. Horror Hound Weekend has given us the gift of that interview for this Robert Englund dedicated episode, so for the first time, fans who didn't get the chance to hear or see our favorite Dreamstalker chat about his life and career get to now. And be sure to check out horrorhoundweekend.com as the in-person event is happening in September 2022, the 9th through the 11th in Cincinnati, Ohio. So without further ado, here's the legend himself, Robert Englund, and yours truly. And I suppose I'll leave you to it with an Elvira quote that's appropriate. Unpleasant dreams. Well, I have a lot of questions for you, sir, and I know we have some fan questions as well. But I'm going to start at the beginning, which is, you started as a theater actor. What made you want to get into acting as a child? And can you talk about working on the stage in the earlier days?
Well, you know, I think it traces back, of all things, a combination of seeing the Mary Martin Broadway Peter Pan with the great Cyril Ritchard playing Captain Hook. And then I also saw the Disney cartoon at the famous theater on Hollywood Boulevard, Grauman's Chinese Theater, with my family and my cousins. And then right after that, I saw 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, another Disney film. And I went to Disneyland the opening week, and they actually had in Disneyland the cutaway of the Nautilus and all the costumes and all the props from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Kirk Douglas singing, "I've got a whale of a tale to tell you, lads," and Kirk Douglas's costume. And the window of the Nautilus was like one of those kaleidoscopes you look into that have that design inside them with all the colors, and it opened up like a giant eye. And you looked out of it and you saw the giant squid. Now, this is Disneyland. I'm 7 years old. I'm there first week, and it was this entree into the world of make-believe and how they did it. And actually that ride, or that, whatever you want to call it,
experience.
What's the word I'm looking for here? Because it wasn't really a ride, but that exhibit of the Nautilus from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea actually eventually became the submarine ride. And everybody that's been to Disneyland knows what I'm talking about. But when the window opened, you saw with the lighting and with the hidden monofilament wires, the giant squid tentacles and the seaweed. And you believed that giant squid, you know, with his little beak was going to get you. And his eyes blinked, and it was like early animatronic. And then I went on the Peter Pan ride in Fantasyland, and you get in a little boat, and it actually flew over a ratio mock-up of the London skyline. And I think that those two childhood events really sort of set the flame inside me for wanting to be part of that world. That world of fantasy and make-believe. And even as a child, I knew how good James Mason was as Captain Nemo. And my mother loved him. And my parents would take me to a lot of adult films in those days. And adult films doesn't mean pornography or nudity. Adult films then just meant films for grown-ups, right, as opposed to the kiddie matinee of Old Yeller, you know, and The Parent Trap with Haley Mills. And I would go to see Jimmy Stewart movies and Marlon Brando movies as a small child with my parents. And I also, I mean, I had questions, and there were some themes that may have been disturbing, or there may have been a sequence that was a little too violent for little Robbie Englund, but my mother and father would explain it to me and explain the cause and effect of violence, and tell me what things meant. But I knew as a 7 or 8 year old that James Dean was special in East of Eden, or Marlon Brando was special in On the Waterfront. And James Mason was a great, I could tell, I just knew. So that's probably the very, very beginning for me. And then later, my mother's best friend, her daughter was considered one of the most beautiful girls in Southern California. And she was a year older than me. But because I had known her since childhood, as I was entering middle school, junior high school, we called it back then, the age of 12 and a half or 13, she sort of had to chaperone me around like a big sister. But her mother, my mother's best friend, also liked that because she thought that beautiful Stephanie couldn't get into very much trouble if she had this little Robert Englund tagging around with all the older boys who were hovering around her like bees around honey. She was a wannabe actress. And she went to a professional children's theater one year, and I sort of tagged along. I don't remember auditioning. I had seen a production there the year before, but I tagged along thinking that perhaps I would just be building scenery and I would be an usher, you know, with a flashlight, sitting people in the audience. Well, somehow I did audition once I was there. She was the one that wanted to be in movies and on the stage. And I auditioned and I got all the starring roles. I was Peter Pan, I was Aladdin, I was Pinocchio, I Hansel in Hansel and Gretel. And at some point in that summer, full of pre-adolescent hormones, I sort of was responding to early star power because I was starring in all these productions, even though the girls around me and the boys around me were 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. And I was 12 and a half going on 13. And I remember sitting in the girls' bathroom and all the girls were putting glitter from those tubes of glitter on their old-fashioned brasiers, the Maidenform living bra. They were all putting the glitter on there because that was going to be the glittering top of their costume as harem girls. You know, they were the harem girls in Aladdin, and I was Aladdin. And my hair had been dyed black, and my hair was very long for the time. This would have been probably 1959, maybe 1960. And my hair was in curlers. The girls used to curl their hair to make their hair bouffant in those days because I was supposed to have black curly hair because I was playing Aladdin. And I was sitting there with these things, I think they were called spoolies, these round things that made your hair curly. And I had curly hair to begin with, so, you know, I sort of had a kind of a afro, I guess, you know, when this was all done. And I had a Maidenform living bra boob in this ear, a Maidenform living bra in this ear, and the girls were doing my hair and playing with my hair, and we were listening to I think it was West Side Story on a record player in the girls' bathroom with all that great echo, and intermittent rock and roll from the radio station, and the girls were smoking because teenagers smoked back then. It was the cool thing to do. And the girls were teaching me how to blow smoke rings.
At 12.
And I'm, you know, 12 and a half. It's going to be my 13th summer. And I'm right on the cusp of adolescence. And in those days, people didn't want to be artists or actors or dancers. You were supposed to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. And I was fast-tracked to be a lawyer. And I remember sitting there and thinking, you know, this acting stuff, I don't know, this isn't so sissy after all. And shortly thereafter, I went to my first really cool actors cast party with the older kids. And remember now, I'm not old enough to drive, but some of them have cars. So I'm driving with 16-year-old teenage girls smoking cigarettes, and I'm in the back seat between two of them. And I'm going into the Hollywood Hills to a party where the parents are out of town, and they're playing rock and roll and Broadway songs, and somebody's gotten into mom and dad's cocktail kit and the liquor cabinet, and there's girls in bikinis, actresses floating on rafts in the swimming pool at night with the swimming pool light on, and everybody's older than me, and there's dancing, and a couple of people are drinking beer. But I didn't go to a party that good probably until I was in college. So I kind of knew that there was this other world besides the world of jocks that I knew from Little League and from surfing and from being a champion swimmer. There was this other world, the drama kids, you know. It was like sort of being dropped down into the movie Fame, you know, or the TV series Fame.
So you
a little bit of Glee tossed in for seasoning.
You learned the truth about
Well, but the thing is, Jessica, I was schizophrenic because I was also the jock. I was, you know, catcher on the Little League team, and I was swimming champion at the big swimming school, and I was taking diving lessons from an Olympic diving champ, and I was just starting to learn how to surf. And so it was this real kind of schizophrenic world for me back then. But obviously I liked it enough that I stuck with it.
That's fantastic. So you learned the truth that the drama geeks aren't as geeky as people make them out to be, is what
Well,
it sounds
here's
like.
my best example of that, and it's a statistical example. Later on, when I'm in high school, and I still have this balance, you know, being the surfer, popular guy, sidekick, wingman to some of the coolest guys in high school, and then my secret life as an actor and starring in the drama department productions. And I remember going back to back. I went to a party with my friends in the football team and the baseball team and the surf club. And there was 20 guys for every girl at this party, and a lot of guys getting obnoxiously drunk on kegs. Friends of mine, guys I loved, great guys with Woodies, you know, surfing cars. And one guy wore a top hat. He was sort of like the John Belushi guy, and he drove a hearse. You know, this is back in the surfing days.
Yeah.
We're talking 1962, 63 now. And the next week, I went to the drama department party. And it was 10 girls to one guy. And they were all these secret, beautiful girls that you would see on campus. But they weren't cheerleaders, and they weren't the surfer girls. But they were these mysterious girls that wore Burberry trench coats and had chopsticks in their bun. Some of them wore glasses, but they were tall, like Nicole Kidman. But because they were tall, boys were afraid to ask them out, even though they were beautiful. And they were all at this party, and they were girls that you'd walk by in the corridors of school, or see 4 lockers down from you that were mysterious. And I knew at that party that something was up, because there was way more going on at that party. The music was better. The rock and roll was better. People weren't drinking out of a keg. There was literally we didn't say it, this was don't tell, don't ask time in America. But like one of the gay guys from the drama club was mixing cocktails, you know. Parents were out of town.
I'm noticing a theme.
It's a theme. It's a recurring theme in Southern California. Hey, Rick. Andy's parents are in Tahoe. Party.
Well, kind of jumping off of that, you've done Shakespeare. You've done all of this beautiful work. It seems like a lot of stories kind of harken back to him, like drama stories. As an actor, though, which writer really seems to resonate with you? Is it Shakespeare? Is there a specific writer that really kind of hits you home?
Shakespeare is, I did Shakespeare in revolving repertory, which means that I was doing a different show on Saturday than I was doing on Friday, and a different show on Sunday.
Oh, wow.
We had rehearsed, you know, it starts out and you're just doing one show and you're rehearsing the other, and then you get 2 shows up, and then you're rehearsing the 3rd show, then the 3rd show. There's a point in the season where you're doing like 4 shows in revolving repertory, which is really a trick, and it's really hard. It keeps you on your toes, but it's also a real test for an actor, and it's a test for an actor to make sense out of the poetry, and to fight the rhyme, and to realize that Shakespeare is like thinking out loud. That's the trick to doing Shakespeare. You're thinking out loud, and so that really stretches you as an actor. But I was almost exclusively comedy in Shakespeare. I had a couple of dramatic roles, and I understudied Iago in Othello, but I was almost primarily doing comedy. I did a George Bernard Shaw play once, and I had a great learning experience in that. I was playing I had a twin sister in the production. Shaw had taken on this play as a bet that he could make a romantic hero out of a dentist. You know, uncool. Again, kind of a nerdy thing, the dentist. And he made a romantic hero out of a dentist. It's a very pro-feminist play, but also satirizing suffragettes a bit. And I played one of the twins, not identical twins, but one of the twins, a boy and a girl, of the so-called, the mother, the suffragette. And I had an entrance in the third act, and the people on stage had been talking about my sister and I, the twins. And we'd rehearse this, and we knew where we had other laughs in the show, and we knew when to be cute, and we had some shtick here and there, and we knew where the satire was, and we came in on opening night into the third act entrance where they'd been talking about us before we entered, and we got like a 5-minute laugh, and it was this huge lesson about when other characters talk about your character in a play, or when the setup, how great the setup can be from a writer of the genius of George Bernard Shaw. And we never knew it. We never realized we had that huge laugh in rehearsals. It's just an accumulative laugh from the setup that begins the moment the curtain opens at the beginning of the play, and things are said about us and what we represent symbolically, and also in terms of our character and the menu, the recipe of the production, the play, and the story. And that was a great, great lesson for me. I remember the first time we got that laugh. The girl, the actress played my twin, Brenda. I remember we were off stage. We couldn't believe it. We talked about it all. We went out and had drinks that night and tried to figure out, and we figured it all out, why we got this great laugh that we had not anticipated. So that's the wonderful thing that you learn about structure and dramaturgy from doing plays by Moliere or George Bernard Shaw or Shakespeare and others. You figure that out, check off. You start to figure that stuff out. It's difficult in regular week in, week out guest starring roles on television, because especially when I began back in the 70s, television wasn't the writing that it is today. Occasional shows were, but today the writing's much better. And I had to learn, even to get comfortable enough and the courage enough in movies and TV to improvise a little bit. And because I'm English trained at the Royal Academy branch in America, at the Meadowbrook Theater, the way the English train you is your first allegiance is to serve the author, the playwright, the screenwriter, then the director, and then yourself. In America, there's kind of a pressure to serve your own sense of truth first. Mm-hmm. And that's important. But when you know tone and style, you learn that there's different kinds of truth and different kinds of reality. The reality of a soap opera is different than the reality of The Wire, which is different from the reality of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which is different from the reality, of a Stephen King melodrama, or the difference between the reality of sort of kitchen sink realism that you might choose in a movie like Alien, as opposed to other shows where you might have a little more fun with them, like Star Wars. You have to play just a tad more heroic. It has a bit of that mythic Game of Thrones part of the tone. So you kind of learn that. That's one of the great things you learn by kind of serving writing first, looking for that style and tone.
And so like each writer kind of helps you grow your repertoire too.
You learn to kind of recognize that style. Every show is a little different. Some shows are absolute naturalism. And you're always looking for truth. But as I said a minute ago, there's different kinds of truth. You're still playing the truth and the agenda of your character in a scene, but you also have to do a bit of a nod to style and tone as well.
Gotcha. That's a wonderful answer. So, I know I'm kind of hopping over to the horror realm now, because I know that, looking at your room and what you're just a legend and an icon in this genre.
Over my shoulder here.
I know, it's beautiful.
There's an original Karloff next to it there.
Oh my gosh.
Famous Canadian portraiture artist in the photography world, Joseph Karsh. Those are a couple of my prized possessions.
Oh, that is fantastic.
A picture of Muhammad Ali above the lamp there. And that you can barely see a picture of me in a straw hat from a famous 70s TV movie I did. But the postcard that's stuck in the corner of that, it's up right there.
I see it.
That's a postcard of Lillian Gish, because I got to work with Lillian Gish from the silent movies in that film, along with Oscar-winning Jack Warden and Richard Thomas from, of course, from the Waltons. But I worked with Lillian Gish. I had a couple of scenes that I was in with Lillian Gish, and that's sort of my 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon that I have with silent movies. Because I've worked with Lillian Gish, I connect all the way back now to Charlie Chaplin.
Charlie Chaplin, yeah.
And everyone, yeah.
That's amazing. Well, and I know you've talked a lot about Freddy in your life, but and we talked about just now, you had done a lot of comedy in your theatrical plays, but also in a lot of the work that you've done. Just prior to Freddy coming along, you were in V, playing the very innocent, sweet, wide-eyed little alien, Willie. Can you talk about why you went for Freddy, and were you concerned both yourself and were you right for the part? Because it was such a departure from what so many people knew you as, but you were so good, obviously.
Well, V, traditional audition, Phyllis Huffman, I knew her late husband, David, a wonderful actor, starred in that Stallone movie, Fist. If you're familiar with that, you know who David is. Phyllis brought me in for V, and I was known at Warner Brothers. I'd done a lot of work at Warner Brothers by then, and I think I'd been back for maybe at least a half a dozen callbacks on Dukes of Hazzard, and I'd guest starred on shows on the lot and done some movies there. And I was on the back lot. They waved me on. I got to drive onto the back lot and park on the back lot. And I was way in the back by the New York City streets scenery. And I went in, and I knew who Kenneth Johnson was, Incredible Hulk and $6 billion man and all of that. And I went in, and I just didn't have a clue because it was an alien. And I said, I said, Ken, I'm not sure what you want here. Help me. And he said, this is like one of the best. I like cut to the chase, no BS direction. And Ken said simply, he goes, 2 words. And I listened, and he said, Gene Wilder.
Oh.
And so Robert Englund, with my curly fro, I knew what he meant. I knew about that kind of hesitant delivery, that shyness, that kind of pervades a Gene's work, and the vulnerability. So I began by channeling those, and then the malaprop. Willie was a malaprop. Willie was trained, I believe, to go to, in those days, I think they referred to it as Arabia, but he was, somewhere in the Middle East he was supposed to go. So he knew Arabic. He was inside his lizard brain. Willie was translating from his lizard language, if you remember the kind of cuneiform writing on the hats and on our emblems. He was translating from his native planet language to Arabic and then to English, because somehow Willie wound up in LA. Central casting, I think. So anyway, so Willie had this hesitancy because of that. And also the malaprop was his joke. It was his running gag, he didn't like to eat the mousies that everybody else ate. But he would be translating, and instead of getting to the word vegetarian, which he was trying to get to, as he had a little brain fart, Willie would say something like, oh, no, I don't want a mousie. I'm a veterinarian. And so I got a lot of, I figured that out, that was part of why I was there in the show. I was the lovable good alien, with a heart of gold, and I was funny, and I had to be a bit of a comedy relief. But very early on, for some reason, I got a ton of fan mail, as much as anybody on the show, if not more, from older women. And when I say older women now, I'm talking about people in their 30s, but they wanted to mother me.
Oh.
There was this, they just thought I think they related to me like a teddy bear, on a teenage girl's bed. And that you win at the fair or something. But I got so much fan mail, then they started giving me girlfriends, and stuff. And towards the end of the show, I was developing a crush on the Star Child. And I think had the show continued, I think Jennifer Cook, the Star Child, I think she would have gone over to the dark side. And I think we were going to recruit Lydia, the blonde alien queen bee, played by June Chadwick. I think we were going to recruit her to the Resistance. So there was going to be a kind of switch there. I think that's sort of where the Bible of the show was going before we got canceled.
Oh man, that would have been fantastic. I loved her.
Fun. It was a hit show. It was an expensive show, and we had one of the top special effects people in the world, John Dykstra from Star Wars, working on our show. And we had a large cast, and I think it was a little intimidating but we had great ratings. And I think, as I remember, I think I met at a charity, network charity dinner or something 6 months or so later. I met Brandon Tartikoff again. I'd met him before, and I think he said to me something like, we made a mistake, because NBC, they hadn't really, or they weren't cognizant of just how huge the show was overseas.
Mm-hmm.
Huge in Europe, and also Australia, and also Asia. And they hadn't really crunched those numbers and realized what that meant, in terms of advertising and syndicated future show at that time. And maybe they would have kept us on had they sort of embraced that statistical knowledge.
I love that show so much. I'm going to bring in a fan question here, because we just talked about V, from Matt Lupsey. And he was asking, what was your favorite memory or moment from V or V the Final Battle?
Well, Matt, I was on one of the miniseries before the series. I remember we'd been up for 24 hours practically. And I was in a morgue somewhere in Los Angeles. And we were just sitting in this morgue waiting to work. And I was with Andy Prine, who's in, obviously, first time I remember Andy, and everybody's seen it, is the Miracle Worker, the Helen Keller story with Patty Duke and Anne Bancroft. He's the brother in that. And he did it on Broadway. So I was asking him great questions about that. But he and I had also done a TV movie together. And in that TV movie, Andrew shaved his head. And I remember it really influenced me when I finally saw the movie, because I didn't have any scenes with Andrew. I think it starred Deborah Raffin and Bruce Davidson. But Andrew shaved his head. And he was sort of imagined by the leading lady. She was sort of having a precognitive attachment to him. And he was a serial killer. A terrorist. I think he'd blown up a plane. And I realized, but not then, but I realize now with hindsight, that talking to Andrew about our working together on that project and how much it meant to me, it was a real good little TV movie. That's a major influence on Freddy, that Andrew had influenced Freddy. So with hindsight, that all-nighter and talking with Andrew Prine is something that I think I borrowed a little from his performance as Freddy. I remember great friends on that show. Jennifer Cook, her then husband, Robert Newman, the soap opera star. My dear, dear friend, Jeff Yeager, whose brother did all my makeup on Nightmare on Elm Street for years.
The Yeager brothers.
Kevin Yeager, yeah. Jeff Yeager, wonderful actor who'd gone to Yale with my girlfriend, Yale Drama School. Kevin and I, and Michael Ironside, I got advice from Michael, lots of advice from Michael Ironside. Was Mickey Jones. We'd get Mickey Jones talking about, being Bob Dylan's drummer and stuff like that. Just great stories. We all got along, and there was parties every weekend, and we'd watch the show, and drink champagne. And I learned a lot on that show from Faye Grant. Faye was under contract, I believe, to NBC at that time. She'd done several shows for NBC. And Faye was difficult to act with sometimes on the show because she'd had dialogue where she had a lot of exposition and plot she had to spit out and pitch. And Faye also knew that because she was one of the stars, they were always going to err in the direction of cutting to a close-up of her, even when she had that kind of boring expository dialogue. And so Faye would turn her back to the camera or profile to the camera, or she would busy herself with a piece of business a lot. And then she would turn and reveal herself when she wanted that close-up. And I remember learning about relaxation in front of the camera on V because I had so many hours of on-camera time. And I remember also learning that thing from Faye about how you could kind of control how they cut you. I also realized later on that as beautiful and photogenic as Faye Grant was, her real talent, and I see this a lot with actors, but her real talent as an actress, she's really a character actress, because I saw her later on Broadway in Singing in the Rain. And she played the girl that can't talk, the actress with a bad voice from silent films. And she was brilliant. She stole the show. I went to visit her backstage, and Andy Warhol and Leonard Bernstein were waiting to meet her.
Oh, wow.
And she also had a show on, I think it was on cable, where she played a kind of eccentric Auntie Mame role years later. And she was wonderful in that. I think she used a Southern accent. But yeah, Faye was gorgeous and sexy and beautiful, and the camera loved her. But I think her real talent was a character actor. Richard Gere is kind of that way. Richard's so beautiful, and and women love him, and he's, a classic leading man. But I think his real gifts as an actor are a character actor. You look at him in movies like Mr. Jones and roles like that, and even the one he did, I can't remember the name of it. He did that great movie with Andy Garcia where he plays the bad cop. But Richard.
Oh, that was the Jackal. I was thinking the Jackal.
Yeah, but Richard's great in character roles, and you see that sometimes. Sometimes people can be a prisoner of their good looks and not get. The people say, well, we're not going to waste his good looks in this character role, and yet they're probably the best actor for that role.
That's amazing. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about personally, because it's one of my favorite things you've done, is Phantom of the Opera. And you were amazing in Phantom of the Opera. You were able to create such a beautiful version of that story and unique. Can you talk about filming that?
Well, Phantom, Jessica, was supposed to be a duo of films. And that's one of the reasons I signed on, because I loved the idea of doing two of the films. And the second one was a great continuation. I got along great with the director. And my beloved Jill Sholin, who looks more like a Christine than any actress who's ever played her. And that includes Emmy Rossum, who I adore. In a little piece of gossip, I remember at my home up in the Hollywood Hills, they were bringing actresses by for me to meet, because I had, for some reason, maybe because they didn't pay me more money, I had like approval of my leading lady, and I didn't need that. I didn't require that, but it somehow came with my contract, I think. And I remember they brought Cynthia Nixon up.
Oh, wow.
And she had her hair very long and straight and blonde. And and she was wondering. I mean, I was a huge fan of Cynthia anyway, and at that moment in time, she was my first choice. I hadn't met Jill yet, and there was a conflict or something. She couldn't do it, but Jill just, not only is she a wonderful actress and she can sing, but Jill also looks like the classic Christine from the Gaston Leroux novel, of Phantom of the Opera. But this was a contractual thing for me. I was signed up with 21st Century Films, which Cannon was also Cannon Films, Golden Globus. And they had just done Dingo's Got My Baby, in Wall Street. And they were doing lots of movies at that time. And The Phantom was to be a 2-picture deal. And we shot it in Budapest, Hungary, which was a great adventure. And there were still Soviet soldiers on the streets then of Hungary. But we got to use the old Soviet studio outside of Budapest, which had a standing set of 1890s London.
Oh, wow.
With cobblestone streets and horse shit on the streets and carriages. And it had been used for a great production with Raul Julia and, oh gosh, just extraordinary actresses. Roger Daltrey from The Who. They had done 3 penny opera.
Oh, wow.
We were able to use their exterior sets. And then we built our own interior sets. And then we also shot on location in the Old Town in Budapest. I was in my trailer one day, and it was they call it a trailer. This is Hungary, 1989, 1990, and it was a little tiny, what the English call a caravan, one of those little tiny rounded back trailers.
You had a box.
It's like 6 feet. You bump your head every time you stand up. And I was sitting in there because it was cold, and I was in full. I don't think I had the makeup on because I think I was just wearing the mask of Red Death for the opera sequence. Yeah. So I was, kind of tired. I've been working a lot. I think it was a Friday, and literally in the Old Town, my little trailer under a 500-year-old church on a cobblestone square in Old Pest, in Budapest, because it's Budapest. And this 1930s Bentley pulled up, and there was a funeral in the church, and a tall Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing man got out wearing a strange, almost frock coat with a cane. And he went into the church, and I was told by people in my cast that were extras in the opera sequence that it was one of the Habsburgs, literally one of the last of the Habsburgs coming to a funeral. And it just made you feel part of that time. But we Dwight Little and I had envisioned our Phantom of the Opera as a salute, as a toast, an homage to the great Hammer films of the 60s with the saturated color and all, starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And we changed it from the Paris opera, which the Gaston Leroux novel is set at, to the London of Jack the Ripper and the opera in London. And that way we sort of facilitated using wonderful actors like Stephanie Lawrence, who'd been in Evita on the West End, and Bill Nighy. I killed Bill Nighy in that film, Steam Bath. And we got wonderful actors from England, and it was pretty seamless with the accents then. We kind of bit into that mid-Atlantic accent, and that way we didn't have to pretend to be French, or we didn't have to shoot it in Paris, which is so expensive. We could shoot, it was easy for us to shoot there and double it for 1890s London and save some money and put the money up on the screen. But I've always wondered what would have happened had 21st Century not broken up. And we've been able to do the subsequent film, which brings Eric Dessler, the Phantom of the Opera, brings him to contemporary Manhattan. And he's living in the bowels of the earth below the subway system in the old train tunnels of New York in an abandoned robber baron's train car. And he has a little artful dodger, a homeless kid who's sort of the heading up his gang. And he survives down there while he's working on his opus, the opera that he can't finish, he can never finish. And one day while he's walking about in the tunnels, he barely hears this voice, this fabulous voice, and it inspires him to complete his opera. It's his muse. And of course, it's the new Christine in this secondary Phantom of the Opera. And she is a subway performer. She's one of those musicians that works down in the acoustics of the subway, and she's blind. And her father, an old immigrant, accompanies her on violin, and she sings Bach, and she sings these art songs and people leave her money in her father's hat or in his open violin case. And I befriend her. I cover my face in a fake skin, and I befriend her, but she's blind, so she doesn't see or sense anything abnormal with me. And I give her, and I train her in my opera, in the role I've written for her. And her father is killed by punk, dog-collared Walter Hill, Walter Hill, New York's kids and bad boys. And I avenge her father's death. And then she's discovered singing my music in the subway. She's discovered by the New York City Opera. And they take her and they train her and they send her to doctors and they schedule a special operation for her eyes, and it's successful. And now she's going to have her debut at the New York City Opera, at the Metropolitan Opera. And of course, I have to go kill a couple of people, and there's skin on my face so that I can attend the opening. And I hear her sing on her debut, and I sneak out of the back of the Metropolitan Opera, and I walk down Fifth Avenue, and I open a manhole cover, and I lower myself down as the first snows fall of winter. And I go back to my train car beneath the streets of New York. You know, it's very romantic.
Oh,
but I love them. We never got to do it. We never got to do that.
That kills me. That hurts my soul that never happened.
Yeah, and you know, I really liked it because it was really would really be an opportunity for me to be vulnerable as the Phantom. I love the fact that below the surface of the streets, it was still another time. You know, it was still the 1890s down there.
Yeah.
Antique. His clothes were a little bit timeless, but he was also dealing with the future. You know, with the gangs, and he had his sort of. He was a bit like Fagin in Oliver Twist, because he had this group of boys that he sort of took care of, that were his gang, you know, that would bring him food and good wine, and he took care of them. You know, they were like I don't know if you've ever read about it, but there were people living, and there still are people living in the subways of New York. They call them old people, you know.
Yeah.
And some of them have little houses down there. They've managed to tap into electricity, and they have little refrigerators, and they live down there. They're homeless. You know, it's very, very kind
that
of
would have been
strange.
so beautiful. So I know we're running out of time, but I have one more question for you, and then a couple more fan questions really quickly. But one thing I wanted to ask you about in regards to Nightmare on Elm Street and your role as Freddy and your horror films that you've worked on, you know, thanks to documentaries like I Am Nancy and Scream Queen, we see that there's more of a subtext within Nightmare on Elm Street than just, oh, this guy's cracking jokes and he's killing people. You know, these films help people, and they empower women. They empower, you know, outlying people. Can you talk about your take on the importance of these films and what you see within them yourself?
Well, one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that our survivor girls are true survivor girls, and they do defeat Freddy. They do meet evil head on and use their wiles and their intelligence and their strength to overcome Freddy Krueger and also what Freddy symbolizes. And I'm also proud that I think, with the exception of Sigourney's magnificent performance in 1979 in the original Alien and Jamie Lee in the original Halloween, we really filled the seats with the first horror fangirls for the entire franchise, which lasted years from 1984 to 2004. And I'm real proud of that. I mean, I think that's really true. Because I know how many female fans we have and they're, of course, they're Heather's fans, and they're Lisa Wilcox's fans, and they're also, Lisa Zane's fans, Monica Keena's fans, but I think that's really part of it. And I think that's part of what Wes Craven always intended, in the Nightmare Bible, so to speak, was what they were really about. The movies are really about the girl. That's why when fangirls or girls that went back in the original 1984 theatrical release, when they went to see that movie with their boyfriend or their brother or girlfriends, they watch those movies differently because they can't help but identify deeper because the protagonist is a young woman. And it's her survival that the story is about, that leads you through the tale. And it's just a different reaction than boys have. Boys might be watching the special effects or thinking that certain sequences are particularly cool. And they think Freddy's cool because he represents the experience of seeing the film. But girls are actually having that empathy, that connection with the leading lady, with Nancy and Alice and my daughter and the Monica Keena character. So it's just a Patricia Arquette character. They can't help that. That's just that's the way you watch a play or a movie or a television show. You or read a book even. You pick someone to kind of identify with. And I think that's real important, in remembering the franchise. I think that's really part of it. That our girls are smart and survivors and strong, and that's really part, a kernel of truth to the success of the franchise.
Wonderful. So I have a couple of fan questions for you really quickly. And I'm actually very excited about this because almost all of them are to do with your voice work that you do now, which I love your voice work.
Well, not unlike Freddy, some of my cartoon voices, they kind of mesh together because I've done so many, but go ahead, shoot.
You got it. Kent Fuller asks, any more upcoming DC projects, voice or otherwise? You were an amazing pick for the Scarecrow in Injustice 2. And you were.
Thank you. Well, one reason I had a little advantage, and so did the actor who played Bane in Injustice 2. Everybody else had to wear that kind of like medieval cone, like you're attending Carnival in Venice, that it looks like a beak. And they had a little camera down here on their mouth as they would do dialogue.
Really?
Sync with the animation. Motion capture.
Gotcha.
The mouth. But because Scarecrow has a fixed expression on his carved pumpkin, and Bane has the breathing mask on, I was able to forego wearing the sort of GoPro camera up my nose and put my cans on, my headset on, and really play with my voice as the Scarecrow. But it was wonderful for me because that job lasts 6 months because it takes so long for them to do it and to animate it. And I kept coming back. And again, I was saying earlier about Warner Brothers, that's one of my lots. I've worked a lot on that lot. Many movies, many TV shows, a couple of TV series. And I never got a star parking place ever in my whole career on the back lot of Warner Brothers. But when I did Scarecrow, the voice for Scarecrow, I got the best parking space on the whole lot. Every time I went, it was the same one. And I know because I've been there before for as far back as the Star is Born with Barbra Streisand. I know that it's the old First Artists building. And it's right next to Clint Eastwood's building, and it's right next to the New Line Cinema building, right when you come in the gate. And I think my parking space was either Clint Eastwood or Barbra Streisand's or somebody's old place. But I would come early when I was doing Scarecrow, and I would like kind of lean against my car with my script, you know, and look cool, just because everybody had to drive by me that came on the lot. It was like, what's Robert Englund doing? You know, Robert Englund's back, you know. Boy, he must be doing something big deal because he's got the best parking place on the lot, you know. And it was fun for me. Finally, after all those years, I was rewarded with the hottest parking spot on the back lot at Warner Brothers. But yeah, it was fun for me, yeah. You know, there's a distance trick because when they edit the game and wherever any individual player is on the game, depending upon your skill set, you're either closer to me or you're a certain distance away. Like it's the same thing with whichever character you pick. Like if I'm with Superman or I'm with Batman and he's, you know, 25 feet away. And so I have to say the line, go back to Smallville, asshole. Or I'm a little closer and it has to be go back to Smallville, asshole. Or I'm up very close to him and it's intimate and it's more Clint Eastwood, go back to Smallville, asshole. So I had to do every line like 3 times because they have to play with that distance. So that's kind of tricky and it wears on your voice a bit. Right. But you learn a lot. And I had done motion capture before. On another game, Call of the Dead, with Michael Rooker and Danny Trejo and Sarah, you know, Buffy the Vampire Killer, Sarah, and lots of and George Romero. Mm-hmm. So I'd done motion capture before, but this was never. I'd never done anything this extensive. So I really loved doing Scarecrow, and I really loved the way they conceived his look too. They're fun. Games are fun.
Great. So Kyle Snyder asks, and this has to do with your voice, how does having an iconic voice affect your daily life?
Well, you know, I'm a Southern California guy, and I went to school in America, but I went to an English acting school. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I had to do was sort of get rid of my surfer. And if I'm talking, if I still slip into that, you know, dude, you know, I can get up in here and that's not, I never get up that high, but and when I narrated the famous John Milius movie, Big Wednesday, even at that point, and I was still an active surfer, but even then I remember when I did that, the narration, I pinched my nose a little bit. I remember the 3 friends and the Santa Ana winds were blowing. And I kind of did it just a little bit like I remember the guys, man. They were so cool. And I get, you know, you get into that voice. But I changed my voice, I think, when I was about maybe 20, 21, because I was at the Royal Academy and I had, you know, hours of voice every day. And you want to sound like an American. I am an American. But I can also switch to English pretty quick. I did a movie a couple of years ago called The Last Showing with Finn Jones. Terrible title. I wanted them to call it The Midnight Movie, but it's a great little film. Very sort of 70s De Palma.
Fantastic.
Great director, Phil Hawkins. And Finn is brilliant in this movie, really goes all out. And I'm really good in this movie. It's sort of my salute to Seance on a Wet Afternoon and Richard Attenborough's strange little quiet, repressed Englishman. And but I was shooting north of London on that film in a wonderful town. But the accent up there is very different. So all my crew, I wanted to do just a straight mid-Atlantic London accent. And everybody up there had that other accent, and I'm hearing them all day, and it was tricky, how that can just kind of
Seep in.
infect you. I mean, the same thing happens when you're in the South for a while. You get a little Southern. You can't help it because it's just so much fun to talk.
Yeah.
To slow down. And the same thing happens when you're in London for a while. You can't help but saying, brilliant. I just saw that new movie. It was so brilliant, because that's how they talk. And it just happens to you. You're hearing it 100% of the time. And, and even the same thing happens a bit in Italy. I mean, I don't speak Italian, but I speak enough to order food and to ask directions and to be personable. And you hear yourself in the lilt after a while, Buongiorno, hey, it just sort of happens to you. Yeah. But my voice, if I'm angry, or if I'm working the voice on a talk show for a second, if I'm teasing the weatherman on Good Morning Kansas City or something, then, people will jump. I had an experience at one of the cons a couple of years ago. I can't sing worth a damn, but I knew I had a great microphone. I could tell. I could hear the sound coming out of the speakers, and I knew this was a really expensive, beautifully balanced microphone. And I was taking my time and being a little mellifluous with my voice, talking to the fans, and slowing down a bit. And somebody asked me to sing the Freddy song the little jump rope girls do. And so I began to sing it a little bit in my Freddy voice, but also I started it in a little girl's voice, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. And I forgot how potent that song is to people's memory. And literally, there was a half a dozen people that couldn't listen to it, that had to leave the theater that I was in. Like 2,000 people. It was a big Q&A. Maybe it was Comic-Con down in San Diego. I can't remember, because they have a lot of money to spend down there. But that's that thing about the voice, is if I'm teasing or kidding and I drop into the Freddy voice, or somebody requests it at the airport or in a bar or something, I have to be careful, because the lady with a tray of drinks walking by me, she might jump out of her underwear.
The power of the voice. That's fantastic.
Power of the voice, yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, sir.
Bring me another round, bitch.
And crash. Sir, thank you so much, Mr. Englund. This has been just fantastic.
Thank you. And I just want to say a little addendum here, a little postscript for the fans. I miss the cons. I miss, getting the feedback on my short-lived series, True Terror, that was on the Travel Channel.
That's great.
And I've got a lot of stuff that I'm waiting, for the COVID people to say yes to, that I want to talk to the fans about, that I can't yet. But also just to see the fans and to see the new merchandising and new action figures and the cool stuff, and talk about all the new films we like. I during the COVID, I was watching some interesting stuff, the new Penny Dreadful and other things. I just heard it was canceled, which is unfortunate. Yeah. Now I'm watching the new Lovecraft show.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah. So, there's different things. There's some stuff coming that I'm looking forward to. I'll tell you, we all have cable now, and we all have we can get the big subtitles. Everybody should check out Sputnik, the Russian alien. Ooh. The girl is phenomenal. And the show, the creature is phenomenal. No spoiler alert further, but it's worth seeing. Yeah. It's kind of a retro Russian alien. I liked it. I think it's worth seeing. Nice. When I get some pizza, have a good time.
If you haven't seen Umbrella Academy, that's fantastic.
Well, I've heard. It's like on my list.
It's so good. Okay. Well, Mr. Englund, thank you again so much. It is always a pleasure to talk to you. You're one of our living legends. You've taken, in my mind, you're on the level of Vincent Price of our modern legends, and I can't give
Vincent back here too.
Oh anyway, my God.
Anyway, I got a great postcard of Vincent. Anyway, I love Vinny, and I can remember, getting stoned and going to see the Dr. Phibes movies. But I also, love Vincent Price ever since I saw Laura, the great Otto Preminger film. And, he went out with such class, starring with Lillian Gish. Mm-hmm. Lillian Gish, there she is.
Right there.
Lillian Gish and Betty Davis in The Whales of August.
Yes.
A great little film, classy film to go out on. I had a dear friend, a roommate, who was Vincent Price's dresser when Vincent Price toured doing Oscar Wilde.
Oh, yeah.
And he told me that Vincent Price was a phenomenal collector of American art, and that after he passed away, much of that collection was taken over by Steve Martin, so now we know it's in good hands.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Well, sir, thank you so much. I can't wait to hear what you're doing next when you're allowed to talk about it. And hopefully, yep, I understand. But hopefully soon I'll get to see you in person, shake your hand, and buy you a cup of coffee.
I think you guys, we're all going to get together in 2021. Yep. And we're all going to be, horny and happy and drinking in the hotel bars and looking at all the cool new stuff that all the illustrators and all the action figure creators have come up with during COVID, in their little studios. And I hope they're all busy, and get to talk to the fans again. It's going to be fun. Get it back on the road.
Exactly. Thank you, sir, again. And you stay safe, and we'll see you next year.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company and we appreciate all of your support.